This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good Erev Shabbos, Rabbi Sai. This is the first week of Pirkei Avos. So at least this week, we're going to learn the Mishna in Pirkei Avos, and something I found rather amazing. The second Mishna in Pirkei Avos, Shimon HaTzadik, Haya Mishyarei Knesses Hagdola. Shimon HaTzadik was the remnant of the Knesses Hagdola, of the Anshe Knesses Hagdola. I almost got stuck on giving the share on the word Shimon HaTzadik. I was about to, but then Hashem led me this way. Hu Haya Omer. He said the following. He would say, Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed. The world stands on three things: Al HaTorah, V'al Avoda, V'al Gemilas Chasadim. On Torah, on the service of Hashem, Karbanos, and on acts of kindness. First thing I want to discuss is, does the world stand on all three together or on each one independently? In other words, for the world to stand, do you need all three? Or
isn't that sort of the
either A or B or C? Three. Well, it also says V'shloisha Ha'isha Niknis V'shloisha Drachim B'kesef B'shtar B'biyah. And you don't have to do all three. It's right. It's one of the three. So maybe here also V'shloisha Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed. Al HaTorah, maybe it's one of the three. So we begin in the following way. The Ra'avan, one of the great Rishonim, he wrote Tshuvos, Tshuva Samach Beis. He says there's a difference between Devarim and Derachim. Then when it says Derachim, it means one thing, and when it says Devarim, it means another thing. Says the Ra'avan, Kal Heicha De'ika Plugta. Whenever there's a difference, an argument, Shechoyle Kal Echa Le'atzmai, where each one is on its own. Ki hacha, like here. The Gimel Drachim Sha'isha Niknes. That's Sha'isha Niknes V'shloisha Drachim. Shekalecha Derech La'atzma. Each one is a road on itself. Shezek kind of that. You don't have to do Kesef and Shtar, or Kesef and Bia. It's either Kesef or Shtar or Bia. And then it says Drachim. Anytime you only have to do one of the ways, it's a road. In order to get to a place, you take a road. You don't have to take two simultaneous roads to get somewhere. So then it says Drachim. The Gimel Darchei Kniyahin. B'chol Heicha Deleka Plukta. But whenever there's no argument, Shekulan Derech Echad, they're all one thing. You need all of them. Tani Devarim. It says Devarim. Kamai Al Gimel Devarim Ha'olam Oimed. Right? It's all three together. The Al Shlashtan Oimed V'loy Al Zeh B'loy Zeh. You need all three together.
What does it mean? They don't stand together.
It doesn't give a number there. So maybe only when it gives a number and it says Devarim, you need all three. What?
There's no machlokes here.
No. Whenever you have different things and all you needed to do is a difference. Right. Doesn't mean a machlokes. Okay? Okay. So the Ravan is of the opinion that the world, in order to stand, it needs Torah learning, it needs Gemilas Chesed, and it needs Avodah. But if, let's say, there's only Torah, the world would falter. Only Avodah, the world would falter. Only Gemilas Chesed, the world would falter. And now we're going to feature a new sefer we never featured before. The sefer Zechus Avos. Zechus Avos was written by the son of the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbeinu Yaakov Chaim, the son of the Ben Ish Chai. He also says, why does the Mishnah say Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed? The Alahoyres is coming to teach Sha'al Yoimer Adam, lest the person say Daili Lasik B'ter Levad. I'll just learn because everything's included in learning. Sha'akol Koloiba. There's Avodah in learning. I'll learn about the Karbanos. I'll learn about Chesed, Gemilas Chasadim. Like Chazal say, anyone who reads the Parsha of the Chatos, it's like he was Makar the Chatos. And by learning, you're also doing Chesed to the whole world. So therefore the Mishnah says, no, the world stands on three things. You need all three. You can't just learn, you have to do Chesed also. You can't just do Chesed, you have to learn, you have to do Avodah. So far we've brought two sources. That this Mishnah, Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed, it says Devarim. Devarim means all three together. The son of the Ben Ish Chai is saying that's the whole point of the Mishnah. You can't just do one, you need all three. So, I was therefore bothered by the following question, which is the point we're going to discuss today. And that is, if the world needs all three things to stand, the world did not always have all three things. The world stands on Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. The Torah was not given until the year 2448. That means for 2,448 years, there was no Torah. What did the world stand on?
Torah existed before the world was made. It was there. It wasn't revealed. But it was there.
The chair is going to have a leg.
Oh, the leg was there. You just couldn't see it.
I have a question. Would you sit on a chair that's going to have a leg? So how did the world exist before the Torah was given?
It's a virtual chair.
B'kavod, right?
Weren't the Avos coming to the Torah? But they're still not the beginning.
That's the question. Now you're giving answers to the question. The question is, so what did the world stand on before the Torah was given? So, the Magen Avos, who is the Rashbats, or the Tashbates, he says, how many generations did the world exist before the Torah? Haidu Hashem ki tov kilim chastai. Haidu Elokim kilim chastai. Haidu Adoni Adam kilim chastai. How many Haidus are there? 26. B'koydem ha-Torah, before the Torah was given, shayu chavav doiros hayu miskayim b'chazdoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What did the world stand on? God's good grace. Hashem's chesed. V'lazeh yesh chavav pa'amim ki li'olam chazdoi b'halal hagadol. Tomorrow you're going to say halal hagadol. There are 26 stanzas in it, like it says in the Gemara Pesachim. V'chein darshu chazal nemoigim eretz v'chol yoshveha im loy kiblu Yisrael sa-Torah. Had Klal Yisrael not accepted the Torah, Maksiv Achrav, what would it say afterwards? Anoichi tikanti amudeha sela. That when Klal Yisrael were makabel Anoichi, then tikanti amudeha, the world stood. Okay, so you want to know, what did the world stand on before the Torah? God did us a favor, He held it up for us. But really it did not have the three legs to stand on. Take a look, Rabbi Isai, at the Medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, Parasha Yud Beis, Ois Yud Beis. It says the Medrash, Lahakim es ha-Mishkan. Why does it say es? It should say Lahakim ha-Mishkan. Says the Medrash, Hadahu dechsiv, Nachisa b'chazdacha. Taman taninan. We learned over there. Where's there? Pirkei Avos. Al shlosh dvarim ha'olam ha'omed. Al ha'Torah, v'al ha'avoda, v'al gemilas chasadim. Ushloshtan zachar and Moshe b'pasuk echad. Moshe Rabbeinu mentions all three in one pasuk. Nachisa b'chastecha amzu ga'alta. You led with chesed, the nation you redeemed. Which amud is this? Zeh chesed. Nehalta ba'azcha zu Torah, because the Torah is oiz, like it says Hashem oiz la'amo yitain. El nevei kodshecha is the avodah of the Mishnah. You ready? Says the Mishnah. Nachisa b'chastecha. Elu hadoros sha'amdu mishenivra olam ad sheyatzu Yisrael miMitzrayim. The generations from the creation of the world until Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim. What did it stand on? Chesed. Right? Nachisa b'chastecha. There is no avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. There was no Torah. Shaya Kadosh Baruch Hu menayig oisam b'chazdai. Shelo hayu masim tovim sheyichyu b'hem. And Hashem sustained them in His chesed. Kenegdam Amar David esrim b'sheish pa'amim ki li'olam chazdai. And in that chesed, Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim. That's why it says Nachisa b'chazdai. So if I ask you, how many pillars did the world have before we left Mitzrayim? One. What was it?
Chesed.
Chesed. Nehalta v'azcha. He led them with His eyes, with the Torah. Nihalam b'schus ha-Torah shekiblu ad hakamas ha-Mishkan. Until the Mishkan went up, how many amudim were there? 2. Chesed and Torah. L'mahaya ha'olam doime ba'isasha. What was the world like before the Mishkan was built? L'traskal, to a stool, al shtei raglayim, that has 2 legs. She'eino yachol lamoid, cannot stand. V'hu roises, it's wobbling, it's teetering. Kivan shasal regal shlishi, when you make the 3rd leg, nisbaseim v'amad, it takes stability. Kach, so too, kivan shenasa mishkan. Once the Mishkan was made, el nevei kodshecha miyad nisbaseis v'amad, the world was nisbaseis. It stood stable. Because at first, Shemetchila, before the Mishkan, lo'hay lo'olam ela shtei raglayim, it only had two legs. What were they? Chesed and Torah. And when the Mishkan was built, the world had stability. You know why it says, Lahakim es ha-Mishkan? You know what else was built when the Mishkan was built? What is the es bol rabbis? The world. Lahakim es ha-Mishkan. Not only the Mishkan, but the whole world. Okay? So until the Mishkan was built, how many legs? Two. Comes the Alshach. Before the Torah, one. Comes the Alshach HaKadosh. He asks a beautiful question. The Medrash says, before the Mishkan was erected, how many legs did the world have? Two. And it says the Medrash, what was the world like? A stool that only had two legs. And what was happening to the stool? It was teetering. Why doesn't the Medrash say that before the Torah was given, it had one leg and the world was teetering? No. Before the Torah was given, it says, the world had one leg, and Hashem took them out of Mitzrayim. Nowhere does the Medrash say that before we left Mitzrayim, before the Torah was given, the world was teetering. It doesn't say anywhere the world was teetering. It was only teetering after they got the Torah and it had two legs. So the Alshach says, when it has one leg, it's not teetering. And when it has two legs, it is teetering. Why does the Medrash only make a point of the fact that the world was unstable when it had two legs, and when it had one leg? Why doesn't the Medrash make that point? So the Alshach HaKadosh, in last week's Parsha, in Parshas Tzav, asks on this Medrash, and on this Mishna in Pirkei Avos, look at number 6, Oyoymar inyan ma'amarenu, al divrei Rabbi Seinu, Chazal say, on the Mishna in Avos, al shlosh dvar ma'olam ha'imid, al Torah al Vayda, Sha'amru sham ki betchila haya olam ha'imid al regel echad, which is chesed. When the Torah was given, it was standing on two legs, and the world was teetering. Frek the Alshech v'inei heyarnu b'devrei meh haya shal amar echad lo haya olam roises, or shal yishnayim haya roises. The world is only teetering with two legs and not with one. Says the Alshech, what's the problem? Before the Torah was given, they had chesed, they had zchusim, and there are no averos, there's no Torah to violate. So you only need one leg, you could do very good, you could hop along on one leg. But once the Torah was given, yeah, you have two legs. But you know how many averos you have now? You know how many mitzvahs have to be kept? You know how many avonos are now going on the other side? Now two legs doesn't do the trick anymore. What happened to them?
Yeah.
You mean you could violate them?
That was what was running the world until they got the rest of them. And then they had Mora, one way or one.
I mean, you still had mitzvahs.
Yeah, I mean, what do you say to Kain about the Pesach, Chatos, Rovitz?
I hear it. Well, maybe you could say, I hear it. Here, let's read inside, and I'll throw something out. It says the Alshach in the second paragraph, Achu, Ki Kaidem Matan Torah, before the Torah was given, La Yimatza Lanu Chet Va'avain, we have no Averos. Al Ken Zechos Echad, Hayam Aspek, L'kiyam Ha'ilam. Therefore, one leg was good enough. Ach V'seisu Yizbarach Lanu As HaTorah, once God gave us the Torah, Liknois Oisher Ha'ilam Haba, to acquire the great merit of the world to come, Az Gam Shehi Amod Sheni, even though it's the second pillar, L'kayim Ha'ilam Hazeh, Haloi L'um Hazeh Yishma Abdin As Ha'ilam. But now that you have the Torah, you have avonos that could destroy the world. And that's those who violate the mitzvahs of the Torah. And therefore the world was teetering until you have karbanos to be mechaper for the avonos. Could be, the Ben Ish Chai, I think Masech the Brachas asks, why is it that when you make a mishabech for a chayla, you use the mother's name and not the father's name? So Ben Ish Chai said, don't say because we don't really know who the father is. That's why. That's what we're trying to say. Hashem, please be marapeh so and so, and he's the son. He's the son of this woman, but the father, who knows who the father is? That's what.
It's not nice.
Says Ben Yayada, the reason is like this, because here you're trying to daven for a chayla, you don't want to be mekatrig on him, and if you bring up the father has the avera bittul Torah. So you don't want to mention the father. Mention the mother. The mother doesn't have the avera bittul Torah. Because bittul Torah is the main accusation against the person. So maybe, before the Torah was given, one leg did the trick, but now that you have limud HaTorah, it's not so easy to fulfill it properly. Okay. So now that led me to the next step, and that is, so you need 3 legs for the world to stand on. Again, the Ravan said you need all 3. Son of the Ben Ish Chai said you need all 3. Originally, the world only had Chesed, then the world had Torah. But what happened after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? What happened to Avodah? Or, Rabbi say, before the Beis Hamikdash was built. What happened to Avodah?
You had the Mishkan though.
Before the Mishkan. So that's what we just read. The world was teetering.
Right.
The world was teetering. So there's a sefer, interesting sefer Habatim by one of the Rishonim in the times of the Meiri. He asks this question, or he doesn't even ask it, he just answers it. We know, Chazal tells us the Beis Hamikdash was Nivra b'Shamayim even before heaven and earth. So really, Avodah always existed. There was always a Mikdash. So the world stood on it. Look what he says on the 4th line. Va'amru shebeis hamikdash nivra kaidem shenivra ha'olam. The Beis Hamikdash was built before the world was created. Mibnei sha'olam oimed al advar ma'nas beis hamikdash. The world stands on what happens in the Beis Hamikdash. So the Beis Hamikdash, it didn't come down to planet Earth yet, but it always existed and was always an amud ha'olam. And similarly, the Tosfos Yom Tov asks, the world stands on Avodah. Right? That's very nice when the Beis Hamikdash is standing, but what are you going to say once the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed? So it's really the Gemara's kasha in Megillah, right? Avram Avinu says, Bama Ida ki iroshena. So Hashem says, B'schus HaKarbanos, Kachli, Egla Meshulashes, Ve'ez Meshulashes, Ve'ayam Meshulash. So Avram Avinu says, Tein Chuzman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayim. So Hashem says, Bizman She'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim. Look what the Tosfos Yom Tov says. First of all, Yesh Loimar Shebeshvil Shetzafa Hazman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayim Nivra. God created the world for be in the zechus of the time that the Beis Hamikdash would be built. Right? Like we said, the virtual chair. We didn't really like that answer so much. But God created the world in the merit of the Beis Hamikdash that would be built. But then, the Tosfos Yom Tov says that really Avram Avinu asked this question to God, and the Gemara says Hashem responded, then the merit of the recitation of the Karbanos, Hashem considers it as if we were makriv Karbanos. Okay.
So this applies in the whole discussion we had with time also has money. It's really interesting now.
Well, that might answer the question. Because you say, well, there's no more Beis Hamikdash, or the Beis Hamikdash hadn't been built yet. But Be'enei Hashem, there is already a third Beis Hamikdash. There is Avodah. Okay. Rabbi say, but that really brought me to the following issue. And that is, the world stands on 3 things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. We know there was a point in time where we only had Gemilas Chasadim. There was a point in time where there was Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. There's no Avodah. Nowadays we only have Torah. We don't have Avodah. We have Chesed. Which is the most important Amud? Yeah, if I ask you that question, which is the most important Amud?
You'd say they're all equal. That's what the Mishnah said.
Why are you trying to say Torah?
I'd say Torah. But Talmud Torah. Keneged Kula. That's what you gotta say. Anyone who's been learning, anyone who has any experience and background learning would say Torah is the most important mitzvah. Chafetz Chaim writes explicitly that in the Gemara in Shabbos, that the Gemara darshans the Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet, Aleph Bina, Gimel Dalet. Mitzvah, most important number 1 is Torah, and then Gimel Dalet, then Chesed. And that's what Reb Chaim Volozhiner says. Very important thing. Okay, look at number 9. Says Reb Chaim, Hinei koydem matan Torah hayarak milos chasadim avoda. Before the Torah was given, all you had was chesed and avoda. Hagam she'amru b'medrash, even though the medrash says shekoydem matan Torah lo hayarak milos chasadim. Right, the medrash we learned in number 5, it says there was no avoda. But it can't be there's no avodah. I mean, Adam brought a carbon, Cain brought a carbon, the world stood on the Reach Nichayach of Noach's carbon. Perusha just means Shalhaya Kviyas La Avodah. There was no set avodah. There was no Tmidim. There is no musafim. Aval mikol makom hari adam harishon hikriv shar paramakrin v'kayin v'hevel v'noyach kiyum kaloylem kulay nasa idei reach nichayich karbanoi. Why? Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, don't you tell me that all there was chesed, because a world cannot stand on two pillars. For anything to stand on one pillar, a minimum of two pillars is required. Uvepachas mishnei raglayim eino olam oimed. Dugmas ha'adam, like anything in this world. Rak achar matan Torah. But after now, okay, so listen carefully. Before the Torah was given, how many pillars were there? 2. Chesed and avodah. After the Torah is given, there's only one pillar. Torah. You know why? Because without Torah, there is no chesed and there is no avodah. Because the carbon of Adam after the Torah was given, you know what it's called? Shchitas chutz. The carbon of Cain and Hevel, you know what it's called after the Torah was given? An abomination. Noach's carbon, you know what it was called? Shchitas chutz. Once the Torah is given, all the chesed of before the Torah, you know what it's called? It's not chesed. You have a guy, before the Torah is given, a guy comes to you and says, you know what? I'm down on my luck. I need money. Could you lend me money? I say, I can't lend you money. I use this money to make profit. It's no problem. I'll pay you interest. So you lend the guy $100, he pays you back 150. Before the Torah was given, what's that called? Chesed. After the Torah is called, what is it called? You're not getting up in Tchias HaMesim. You have a man, Rabbi Akiva, he saw a Meis Mitzvah, he took the body, he carried it, he buried it. Oh, he thought he was a good guy until he learned the halacha. Meis Mitzvah is kaina mekaimai. So Rabbi Akiva thought he was doing chesed. Turns out he learned that what he was doing was called shvichas damim. Once the Torah was given, all avodah and all chesed is nothing without the Torah. And therefore, says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Ikar Amud is Torah. Torah includes all 3 Amudim. Okay, but we're going to see it. I'm going to flip it in the other way. Okay? Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, 3rd line, Rak Achar Matan Torah, Ein Avodah Gmils Chasadim Shel Koydem Matan Torah Klum. All the avodah and all the chesed before the Torah is nothing. HaKarbanos Yiu Shchutei Chutz. You know what we would tell Adam about his carbon after the Torah is given? Adam Yichayv Kares. V'yischayv Alim Kares. Chesed, Shekaydim Matan Torah, Hinei Lahalvois Baribis is a Toiva, like the Taz says. And before Matan Torah, it's Chesed. And now, what do we call it? One of the biggest Averos. We call it Ribis. You don't get up for Tchiyah. B'chaf Lamed Shin Dalid. No, after that. Maybe Shvichas Damim. Ki ein shemaisa ata hagon imloi hakasa b'Torah. No act is good unless people think, yeah, I'll be nice. There's no mitzvah being nice. Unless it says in the Torah that this is a good thing to do, don't do it. It makes me feel good and fuzzy and warm. It gives me a good sensation. It makes me feel, no. Anything that's not written in the Torah is not a mitzvah. Ki klolos ha-Torah rabim. There are many general activities that are mentioned in the Torah. Kol sheken ha-pratim dakim oy. There are many particulars. V'nisgavim. Asher b'nokel yukashel b'hem. That if a person is not knowledgeable in Torah, he thinks he's doing the right thing. It's not. For example, Kamashikaza Rabbi Akiva in Masechta Smachos. Betchilas halichasoi lilmoid, when he began to learn matzah meis mitzvah, he found a dead body that had no barriers. Benasa oisoi kama milin, he carried it. V'lo yada, he didn't know ki meis mitzvah koina mekayma, that if somebody dies in a place and he doesn't have kfur, you bury him there. V'chashav sha'asa mitzvah gedala, he thought he was doing a big mitzvah. Ubihivadai, when he found out yada, he realized ki ashem, that he was guilty. Kilu shofech damim. Ki kain derech kol hamischased v'lo yada din Torah. If someone is doing chesed and he doesn't know the details of the halacha, it's not chesed. It's a nice thing to do. You know what you're called? an am haaretz, v'lo am haaretz chassid. Ki yavshir lo lizar b'davar echad minei elef. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, it's impossible to know any halacha or any mitzvah unless you're proficient in the halachas. So you think you're being a good guy, you're not. So says Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the 5th line from the end, v'lachein achar matan Torah, once the Torah was given, shekol inyan nase b'madrega hayoser gavaya, where everything is being elevated. You can't lend ribbas, you can't make a loan with interest. You can't just be a nice guy. You have to know all the halachas. We don't even know how to daven. We don't even know how to do chesed. Only according to the Torah. Nowadays, Torah is not pillar number 3. Torah is all 3. Torah is all 3 pillars. Ki belado, without the Torah, loy yachainu me'uma, nothing is done. If you don't know Torah, I davened. Did you have kavanah for every word of the first bracha? You didn't? You didn't daven. Did you realize the fneimiyat ha'omed? You know, if you don't know the details of the halacha, you didn't daven. If you don't know the details of the halacha, you didn't do chesed. You weren't a nice guy. So bottom line, and this is, Rabbi said, this is not the chiddush over here. This, right, if I would have asked you, which is the most important amud, you would have known that I would have said that it's Torah, right?
Right.
But here's the chiddush, here's the whopper. This might be the most outrageous thing you've heard in a while. Okay? And it was so outrageous that for many years I could not even accept it. I saw many years ago, I don't even remember where, and it was bothering me. I saw a certain idea, b'shem the Sifrei Chasidus, and I had a very hard time swallowing it. And I saw again yesterday, the Sfas Emes brings down on Pirkei Avos, on this Mishna, Shlosh Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed, ala Torah ve'ala Avoda. Avoda, the Bartanur says, is karbanos. And then in the Golos, where the world only has 2 legs. But then you could say maybe Tefillah is instead of Avoda. Says the Sfas Emes, I argue on the Ravan. The Ravan said you need all 3. Says the Sfas Emes on 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th line. You see that? Sfas Emes? Avol nira de oi kamar. The Mishnah means either Torah, or Avoda, or Gemilas Chasadim. The Gam HaTorah Nitna Rak Achar Beis Alafim. The proof is the Torah was given after 2,000 years. That means the world stood on something other than Torah. Says the Sfas Emes, even though when there's a pasuk in Yirmiyah, in Maibrisi Yom V'Layla Chuka Shemayim V'Aslei Samti, that's going either on Torah, Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. Says the Sfas Emes, the world has different periods of time. Mikamakam Yishlaymer HaPirosh Itim Itim Him. Yesh Zman Shemiskayim Al HaTorah. There are certain periods in history where the world stands on Torah. V'yesh Alo Avoda, sometimes on Karbanos. Rak Sheneschalek Lizmanim Pratim. The world has different periods in history. Kamasha Kasav B'Shem HaRebbi Rebbe Elimelech. Like they say in the name of the Rebbe of Melech, Rebbe Elimelech Milozhinsk, Ad Ha'arizal Torah. Until the Arizal came along, the world stood on Torah. V'yato Gemilas Chesed, and now the world stands on Chesed.
Well, if you look at the
Wow.
Avos, right? The Avos,
Wow.
ones, right? So Avram's time and say Chesed was.
The Zohar says in Parshas Vayetze, Al Shlosh Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed, Al Torah, Al Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. Torah is Yaakov, Avodah is Yitzchak, Chesed is Abraham. But to me this is a tremendous chiddush. I actually saw somewhere that the Ikar Avodah B'Zman Hazeh is Tzedakah v'Chesed. And certainly the Sfas Emes is quoting the Rebbe of Melech, that until the Arizal, the Amud Ha'olam was Torah, and now the Amud Ha'olam is Chesed. That's not something that is generally taught. Usually we tend to think the most important mitzvah is Torah, and it certainly is. It's Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, not Tzedakah, not Chesed. But here we do have a quote that until the Arizal it was Torah and now it's Chesed. What does that mean? I don't know. But I had a hard time swallowing that. And then I saw there's a Sefer Lahavois Eish from the Kutzker who says the same thing. Shebedoyrois ha'achroinim terem bias haMashiach. Now he doesn't say the Iker mitzvah is Chesed. He just says the phenomenon will be Yismatu ha'oiskem b'Torah v'avoda. Those people who learn Torah all day only, there are not so many of them. People who daven properly, there are probably even fewer. V'yirbu ha'oiskem b'tzedakah. But Jewish kindness, that there's always a tremendous plethora of tzedakah v'chesed in Klal Yisrael. And v'hagula ha'amitis, the true geula, tavai beglal hatzedakah, will come in the merit of tzedakah. Ka'katzav, tzion the mishpat tifteh, tipadeh, v'shaveha b'tzedakah. That Tzion will be redeemed in the chutz of justice, and the captives will be returned in the merit of tzedakah. So again, it could just mean, it doesn't mean that nowadays the Iker mitzvah is tzedakah v'chesed. I wouldn't say that. The Iker mitzvah is always Torah. But if you look around the world, you look at most shuls, how are people davening? Are people spending their time learning? Don't answer that. But so when you make an appeal for a hatzalah, for an organization, v'yamech kulam tzadikim. But still, what does this mean? The Arizal, the Kutzker. So I was astounded to see that this idea has another source as well that I cannot dismiss. And that is, there is a brayso on Avos Rav Nasan, which I never really took as literal as it probably is meant to be. And that is, the Avos Rav Nasan is explaining our Mishna, Shlosh Dvarim ha'olam oimer ala Torah ala v'adgmilas chasadim ve'al gmilas chasadim ketzad harei hu oimer ki chesed chafatzti v'lo zavach. Hashem says, I like chesed, I don't need karbanos. Ha'olam etchilo nivra b'chesed shenemar ki amarti oilam chesed yibaneh shamayim tachen emunas chabahem. This is a Avos Rav Nasan, the Chafetz Chaim quotes many times. Pam achas haya Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai yotze miYerushalayim. One time Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the leader of Klal Yisrael, was leaving Yerushalayim. V'haya Rabbi Yeshua halech acharav. Rabbi Yeshua was following him. V'ra Beis Hamikdash charev. He saw the Beis Hamikdash destroyed. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Oy lanu al zeh. Woe to us who charev makom shemechaprim boy avenosem shel Yisrael. Woe to us that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, the place of atonement. Amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, what are you worried about? Don't sweat it. B'ni al yera lecha. Yesh lanu kapara achas shehi kemoisa. We have something just like it. V'yezeh, zeh gemilas chasodim. Shenemar, ki chesed chafatz v'lo yizavach. And then he goes on to explain that Daniel, the Ish Chamudos, he was very involved in Chesed. He was involved in Simchas Chassan Mekala. Fine. And I never realized, why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say we have Chesed? Why didn't he say we have Chesed and Torah? Aren't there two Amudim left? Right? What did Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yeshua was crying, woe to us! What happened to the pillar of Avodah? So what does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say? Don't sweat it, we still have Chesed. Why didn't you say don't sweat it, we still have Torah and Chesed? After all, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah that the Bnei Eli died young, and Rav and Abai both came from the Beis Eli. One of them learned Torah and Chesed, and one of them only learned Torah. And they learned, it says, Kiyim bezois yichupar avoin Beis Eli. It says, Bezevachu v'mincha lo yiskaper, avol v'Torah gmilas chasadim yiskaper. So we see Torah and Chesed are equals, at least. So why is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saying we have Chesed? What happened to Torah? You ready for this? Comes the Vilna Gaon in his commentary to Shir HaShirim. You ready? Perek Vav Pasuk Dad. Yafa ad rayasi kisertza nava kirushalayim ayuma kanid galais. Pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Yafa at rayasi kisertza. You're beautiful like Tirza. Nava, you're pleasant, kirushalayim. Ayuma, you're astounding, kanid galais. Says the Vilna Gaon, there are three chalakim of Klal Yisrael. There is Shevet Yehuda, there is the Aseres Hashvatim, and there's the Dar Midbar. Are you ready for this Gaon? Says the Vilna Gaon, Yafa at Rayasi Ketertza, Nava Kirushalayim, Ata Maskal HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Shabcha. Hashem is praising Klal Yisrael. Rabbi said, please look at this Gaon. It's one of the most astounding things you'll ever see. Says the Gaon, Hashem is praising Klal Yisrael. V'omer la, Hashem is saying, Higia ha'esha tigoel, the time of Geula has come. V'afa pisha ata incha be'eretz Yisrael, even though you're not in the Holy Land. Ata yafe b'mara ketirtza, you're beautiful like Tirza. V'nava ata b'chituch evar Yerushalayim, you are pleasant like Yerushalayim. Ayuma, you are awesome. Perish ve'emascha mi sharaya ischa. People who see you are astounded. Kined galais. Heim had the golem shaholchu b'midbar. They are the Jews who traveled in the midbar by degalim. The Tirza is the Shomron from the Aseres Hashvatim, where the Malchei Yisrael lived until the times of Achav, like in Sefer Melachim. Yerushalayim is the Makam HaMikdash and Malchus Beis David. They are the most beautiful. Ki b'yeis ha'geula. Who's going to be redeemed first? The Aseres Hashvatim. Ready for this? Ki be'ez hagula yigalu b'rishon Aseres Hashvatim. And then v'achar kach Shevet Yehuda. V'achar kach yichyu dar hamidbar. Says the Gaon. You ready? The Vilna Gaon. Where when the Malach wanted to teach him the secrets of the Torah, the Vilna Gaon said, no thanks, I'll figure it out on my own. Says the Vilna Gaon. V'ha'inyan. Shal shloisha devarim ha'olam Oimed, ala Torah, v'ala avoida, v'al gemilas chasadim. Says the Gaon, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, not only do we not have avoida, we don't have Torah either. Says the Gaon, v'achar shegalinu me'artzenu, v'nisrachaknu me'alan masenu, which is the Beis HaMikdash, ein lanu loy Torah. We don't have Torah anymore. K'moshe nemar, it says in Eicha, Malkaha v'sareha b'agoyim ein Torah. It's a pasuk. By the way, we once gave a whole shir on this pasuk. I forgot about it. The Gaon says, and the Gaon quotes this pasuk in many of his commentaries, our kings, our gedolim, are in the nations, ein Torah. We don't have the Avodah HaTorah anymore. V'loy avoida. That's why when Shemona Esrei is over, we say, Achar Tefillah, which is B'makam Avoida. Sheyibane Beis HaMikdash M'her V'yameinu. V'tia Avoida Atzma. When the Beis HaMikdash is built, we'll have the Avoida. Yiratzai Milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu Sheyibane Beis HaMikdash. And what will happen then? When the Beis HaMikdash is built, we'll have Torah. But now we don't have Torah.
The Gaon learned around the clock. It's hard to believe that.
And even the Gaon who learned around the clock said, compared to the Torah that was available before, that we don't have Torah. All we have today is Chesed. The only amud that we could do today is you could help your friend. Says the Gaon, how do I know all we have is Chesed? Because when Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai were walking out of Yerushalayim, and Rabbi Yeshua said, woe to us that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say? Oh, don't worry, we have Torah. No, he didn't fool himself. He didn't say, don't worry, we have Torah. Because the same way we don't have Avodah, Malka, V'Sareh, B'Agayim, ain't Torah. We don't have Torah either. Ein lanu loy Torah v'loy avoda. That's how the Gaon learns. K'mashamru chazal k'shachara beis hamikdash bachu v'yamru chas Hashem ein lanu tukuma ki ein lanu loy Torah v'loy avoda. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Don't worry. V'oid nishtayir lanu davar echad v'hu gemilas chasadim k'mashe nemar Oilam chesed yiboneh. Says the Gaon, the wicked kings of the Malchei Yisrael. Could someone pass me Sefer Malachim from the Tanakh? The wicked kings, the Malchei Yisrael. Af al pi shemehen hayu rishayim. Mikol makay Malchei Chesed hayu. They were still Balei Chesed. K'may shenemar. There's a pasuk in Malachim Aleph, Perek Chaf, pasuk Lamed Aleph. Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Chesed hema. Thank you. In Perek Malachim Aleph, Perek Chaf. I must have missed this pasuk. Perek Chaf, pasuk Lamed Aleph. Ki Malchei Beis Yisrael, Malchei Chesed hem. Says the Gaon. K'may shamar, ki Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Chesed hem. K'may shamar Rabbi Seinu. Chazal say Izevel, right? The wicked Marshas Izevel. When she was buried and the dogs, her hands and her head and her feet were intact. You know why? Because she would dance in front of the Kala, clapping her hands, nodding her head, and jumping with her feet. Okay? And she would say, Hashem says to Klal Yisrael, even though you're not in Eretz Yisrael, and you don't have Torah, and you don't have Avodah, at Yafe Alai, you're so beautiful. Ketirza. Tirza is the Shomron. Hashem says to Klal Yisrael, you Klal Yisrael today in 2015, Karbanos you don't have. Torah you don't have. I think it means like this. Of course we have Torah. It doesn't mean Torah is not the most important mitzvah. It's still the most important mitzvah. Still, if you have a choice between doing Torah and Chesed, Torah always comes first. But the only Amud that has been unaffected by the Galus, Avodah, you have tefillah, but you don't have karbanos. Torah, we once learned, we're missing almost 99% of the Masechtas Shas. The only Amud that has been unadulterated and unaffected by the Galus is Chesed. So Hashem says, Klal Yisrael in 2015 is beautiful to me, like the Malchei Yisrael in the Shomron, who didn't have Torah, who didn't have Avodah, but had Chesed. Shema Chesed. Novek Yerushalayim. You're beautiful to me, like in Yerushalayim where they brought karbanos, and you're still beautiful to me, like the Nidgalos, the Klal Yisrael, and the Midbar who makabel the Torah. How beautiful is Klal Yisrael to me? Says the Gaon, if you take the words Yafa, Yud, Nove, Nun, Aleph, Ayuma, spells Ani, I. You're beautiful like myself. Hashem says you're perfect. When I look at Klal Yisrael, I see the Tzelem Elokim, Ayuma, Nava, Yafa. But the Gaon is saying a tremendous chiddush, that the only Amud that today remains intact is the Amud of Chesed. So when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Shua were leaving Yerushalayim, and they were crying, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, don't worry, we still have Chesed. He didn't say we still have Torah. Torah we still don't have. We don't have. Don't fool yourself. As many sarm as you see on the shelf, it's only a tipa shabiyam of the Chachma HaYaina.
What happened to the home?
Yeah, what happened to it? It's gone. It's gone! We have a whole shir on it once. It's called The Mystery of the Missing Torah.
Since when?
Since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But that means that what is Chesed taking the place of? Beis HaMikdash, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai told Rabbi Shua, don't worry about the Beis HaMikdash. We still have Chesed. So the Chafetz Chaim in the Avos Chesed, I'm aware of 3 places, I brought 2 on the sheet, where he says, Bizman Hazeh, the only kapara that we have is Chesed. Chafetz Chaim says, well, if Chesed is the only kapara that we have, the same way the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash was unceasing, every day, Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, constantly karbanos, non-stop, chatos, asham, shlamim, says the Chafetz Chaim in the Avos Chesed, V'al kain, kivon she mechaprim avonos k'mei karbanos, if Chesed is mechaper averos like karbanos, muchrach ha'adam lezdabek v'hen tamid, a person has to make sure not to do Chesed once a week, once a day, constantly. You know why? Because we're constantly doing averos. And the same way we would constantly have to bring karbanos, just like the Mizbeach was not batal even yoim echad from hakravas karbanos, a person has to understand his ma'isim of chesed are in lieu of the hakravas karbanos. In fact, Chavetz Chaim suggests that every Jew should have some kind of gemach in their house. Lending money, lending something. So Chavetz Chaim says, you're probably wondering that this rabbi is coming and telling you to be such a frummi, that every house should have a gemach, should have some kind of, permanent type of chesed operation. Chavetz Chaim said, look, this is in the instead of the Mizbeach. And just like every Beis Hamikdash has a Mizbeach on the inside, every home should have some kind of formal, official type of chesed activity that they do from the inside of their home. So we're learning a very big chiddush. Wow. What I thought was maybe only in the Hasidic Sfarim, that until the Arizal was Torah, and then from them is chesed, the Vilna Gaon is telling us even more than that. Until the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, you had the Amud, you had all three. Bisman hazeh, there's only one pillar that remains intact, and that is the Amud of Chesed, and ve'alzeh ha'olam kayam. I wish you all a good Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.